Betrayal trauma is, I think, one of the worst forms of trauma people experience.
And it's a hard thing, especially as a man. You know, there's a deeper level of shame that maybe goes with being a betrayed man, that something about me as a man was not good enough for her.
October 13th of 2024, I told my husband that I want to stay married to him. He waited over 4 years to hear that. When I look back in the rearview mirror, I'm proud. In the moment, I didn't feel that way, but when I look back now and I see the progression, I'm proud.
Welcome. Today, you have the privilege of hearing two very powerful stories of recovery from two of our past course participants, AR bloggers and AR staff. I'm really excited. I'm excited for you guys to get to hear what their experience was and what it was like before recovery and now after recovery. So to begin, Jeremy, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Jeremy, and I was on staff at a church for 12 years prior to coming here to being on staff at a Fair Recovery. I've got 3 boys. They're all 3 and under. Got one of them turning 2 tomorrow.
Busy.
Yeah, so it's a little bit nutty in our house, and we drink lots and lots of coffee. Here at AR, I've been here for just a little bit now, but I get to do content, and I get to work with Candace and work with you and all of our other therapists and content creators and our team, JP on camera here, and just get to do a lot of the fun video stuff that we put out every week.
That's great, and we really are glad you're here. What about you, Miss Candace?
I have been married for 26 years. I have 21-year-old twins. In addition to being on the content team for a Fair Recovery, I'm also a course coordinator. I coordinate our Hope for Healing course, which is our 17-week course for the wayward spouse. And I'm also part of our intake team. So I have the privilege of speaking to people every day and helping them with some next steps to get them started on the recovery journey.
That's great. So back to the beginning. For you, Jeremy, how long ago was Discovery?
So Discovery for my wife and I now was coming up on 8 years ago. We've been married for coming up on 10 years. So it was just a couple years into our marriage, and it was October of 2017. I went skydiving. It's the only time in my life I've ever been skydiving. So big feelings and emotions during this day, because that was a terrifyingly cool experience. And then my wife had told me she wanted to talk about something, which normally, we just talk about things. And so I was like, okay, I was a little bit worried, but didn't know what it was. Didn't have this in my mind. And then, I get home and she had shared that she'd been unfaithful in our marriage.
Wow. So you've had 3 kids since then?
Yeah.
What about you, Candace? When was Discovery?
Our first D-Day was August 31st of 2020. I say first because there were then 3 more and they spanned over the next 10 months. And I would say they got progressively, they increased with the grand finale being around the 10-month mark. So first one being August of 2020 and the 4th and final being in July of 2021.
As the wayward spouse, I well remember the first 24 hours. I think I could probably account for almost every minute of the first 24 hours. It was memorable. I'll start with you this time, Candace. What was the first 24 hours like for you?
I had heard the phrase, of course, heart beating out of your chest, but it wasn't until that day that I ever really understood what that meant. I wasn't crying, I wasn't yelling, but I looked down at my shirt and I could see it moving rapidly. That was how much my heart was racing. I confronted, I begged. I was just so desperate to just finally hear the truth. And I wanted to believe what was being said, but unfortunately I did not.
What about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, it's odd. I only remember like a couple of things about that day. The skydiving was a big one, obviously. I remember where I was sitting. It was a white IKEA couch we had there. I remember there were those SNL skit tiny hands were on our coffee table. I still don't know why those were there. But to this day, I remember those, and I don't like the tiny hands. I'm more of a just kind of go internal and retreat when something happens person. And so when she shared this with me, I definitely went into my head and don't remember much after her saying those words other than later that day I was sitting, a friend, we had known some friends that had gone through this, and the guy came and sat with me and helped me kind of process a little bit of what happened. But I don't remember anything he said. All I remember is that he showed up, and that was nice.
I think a lot of times you go back and you kind of, obviously because of the trauma, you relive it over and over again. I'm wondering if you had had a way to be different. Is there anything you would change?
I'd probably go back and not do it on the day I went skydiving, because I flew in planes a lot throughout my life growing up, and that forever marked me to where like I get anxious in planes today, and we've talked about this before. Like my hands start to sweat and weird things happen. So I would change that. And then in hindsight, I also know that my wife was talking to our therapist. She was talking to friends. She was very tactful in the way that she came about sharing that information with me, which definitely, it could have been a lot worse. I'm recognizing that too. And it is a lot worse for a lot of people too.
Other than almost having your heart explode, Candace, what would you have done differently if you could do one thing differently?
Ooh, I had wished that I had done all the things I would go on to do within about the first 2 weeks after discovery. I had wished that I had done them all sooner. I also had really wished, and this is a controversial one, so please feel free to weigh in here. I waited until, I think around the 11-month mark after D-Day to reach out to the affair partner's spouse. I had regretted not doing that significantly earlier. I know that that's a controversial one.
Well, it is your story. There's the story before and there's the story after, so that's fine. How we handle it is how we handle it. There's not necessarily a right way, unfortunately.
I think too, like when you say that though too, one of the things I wish I would have done differently in that first 6 months is given myself a little more grace for all the different things that were going on, because this happens in your life and then your life continues. Like you continue to have work and you continue to have responsibilities and demands that come your way. And some of those are really, really hard now, depending on your situation especially. And for me, there were various things that I wanted to kind of white knuckle through and just show that I was strong enough. What I probably ended up doing is adding to some of the emotional junk that I had to come back through later on and deal with. And thinking about just the various things people might do throughout that time. Like at some point you got to look back and give yourself some grace in it too, because you are just so emotionally activated. It's hard to think logically.
Candace, I had a question for you. How long after discovery did you get involved with affair recovery?
Really pretty quickly, thankfully. My husband found affair recovery via YouTube videos, and we started an EMS online group within less than 2 months of discovery. And I remember being so eager to start. I remember being like, is there a group that started yesterday we could join? So we first started with EMS online, and then my husband and I took Harboring Hope. My husband took Hope for Healing.
I was asking because in our efficacy study that we're going to be publishing pretty soon, one of the factors that really helped with how quickly people improved with anxiety and with depression was how soon they got into one of the courses. The earlier you got into that in recovery, the faster you people seem to have recovered.
I love that you're mentioning that, because when I'm speaking to people, I will hear, we don't think we're in a good enough place to join that group. We don't feel we're in a good enough place to attend the weekend. And I'm like, that is exactly when you join a group. That is exactly when you do come to the weekend. Go be in a whole room full of people who feel the exact same way. Just get there. We'll take care of the rest. And I absolutely see the correlation of just getting there, getting into a group, finding community as soon as possible. I'm super, super grateful that we did that as soon as we did.
What was the most helpful thing your mate did right at the beginning to help with your recovery?
She had been talking for a while, I understood, with our therapist and some friends, and they'd given her a lot of advice. And it seems like she, in hindsight, especially now being in the space where I'm talking about these kind of things with other people, I appreciate that she applied just about everything that everybody told her to do. And what it ended up doing is it just gave me a lot of safety to be. And especially as a man and being a little younger at the time, not knowing much about emotional health, and how to process emotions. And even in our culture with men, emotions are kind of looked down upon sometimes. And so she just gave me a lot of space to be, whether I was having a good day or I was having a bad day. She would just listen, talk through it, was open to talking about it. I mean, I think that allowed me to just be like genuine and authentic with where I was at any point, instead of like stuffing emotions or, judging myself or things like that.
If you're watching this and you haven't told your mate that you're involved in an affair or some sort of infidelity, please see a therapist first and let them help you figure out what's a healthy way of being able to disclose, because it's going to go a lot better. What about for you, Miss Candace? What's the most helpful thing your mate did in the beginning?
He sat with me in it. He didn't run. He didn't leave. He didn't yell. He was there. He was present. He answered all my questions. He was cool, calm, and collected. However, I was functioning with, I don't know, I would say somewhere between about 10 to 20% of our story. I know you asked what was something that he did that was extremely helpful, and I would say it was that he was present and willing to respond to whatever I said, but because I didn't have all the information, he was unwilling to disclose anything. So we were just functioning with the information I had at the time. The best way I could describe that, of the multiple D-days that got significantly worse, was it felt like you got punched in the face and you get up and you're just barely able to catch your bearings, and then you get sucker punched from the other side. And it's just this, it's so disorienting and incredibly hard to navigate.
There was a piece of that was true for us as well, where I got one version of it earlier on, and then a couple months later I got another level. And it seems like the punches get harder each time too. Generally, I think, my wife was trying to be gracious and loving and not disclosing the whole thing because she didn't want to hurt me. Because generally the details you want to hide are probably the most hurtful details. And so each time you're getting up, you're taking another punch. That next punch is a lot harder than the other ones.
Rick, I love that you mentioned if people haven't disclosed yet and they're looking for, advice on how to do so, to please see an expert and get some guidance. I would love to just even add that we frequently speak to people who maybe there has been an initial D-Day, but there's a lot more information that they know they need to share, and they have no idea how to do it, when to do it, and they are scared to death to do it.
Right. And you know that you actually really do need to do it. Again, I think that's when a therapist can be amazingly helpful. At the very beginning, I know things are really crazy at the initial part of the story. Did anybody give either of you some really good advice?
In early recovery, Candace, and I again want to emphasize this is unhealed early recovery, Candace, had one hell of a vengeance wish list. And I spent a lot of time trying to convince my therapist why I should do these things. I mean, I wanted to do a full takedown. I wanted to take down marriages, jobs, public shaming. Like, I wanted to do it all. And she totally normalized my desire to want to do that, but she was extremely balanced in making sure that I had a clear picture of how that might go if I chose to do so. She also said things to me like, that might feel really good today, and I understand why you would want to do that today. But are you able to think about how you might feel about it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if your daughters find out? And the logical side of me was able to listen to that, and I'm so glad that I did. I will admit that I was angered by it, just because I thought, why should I have to be the one to take the high road and be the cool, calm, and collected person here when, my heart and my life was treated with such disregard, and now I have to be, safe for everyone else. But I thought that was excellent advice, and I did take it. And so the healed version of Candace is very grateful that I did not carry out my vengeance wish list.
Early on, I really struggled with comparison and what ended up being like minimizing our situation, because I would say, it's not as bad as this, or it's not as bad as this, and I just didn't know what was the best way to feel. And a friend told me that the pain of betrayal is not proportional to the act committed. What he meant by that was, just because our situation is different or isn't like this, it doesn't make the pain any less. And that really freed me to just move forward and not be so judgmental towards myself in the process.
Right, because it's easy to want to compare your situation against another and say, my situation is worse. But what I've noticed is betrayal trauma is betrayal trauma. Whether it's a one-night stand, pornography, or a 20-year affair, there are differences in how long it may take to rewrite your history for 20 years. But it's still the same trauma to the person who's been betrayed.
Jeremy, I love that you said that, because I also realized that in early recovery, Candace thought that the possibility of healing was directly proportionate to whatever the infidelity was. Like that if it was some grand scale, it would be impossible to recover. And if it was something lesser, your odds would be higher. I didn't understand that at all. And so that's part of what initially had me feeling like there was no hope, because I thought, well, if I had to put it on a scale, I would probably say, I don't know, I thought my story was about a 9 out of 10. And so I thought, there's no hope. You know, for some other people in my group, maybe there is, but not for me. I now have a completely different understanding of that, directly proportionate to, you know, Rick, I'd love for you to weigh in on this, but I feel like it's directly proportionate to the help that you get.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons community is so important, because you begin to see, I'm not alone. Other people are going through the exact same thing. I'm not unique. It's that sense of uniqueness that my story is better, worse, that ultimately causes us to get stuck and think it's impossible. But when we can see there are others going through the same thing, it begins to go, okay, it's not just me, and that makes it more acceptable, or able to wrap your mind around it to some extent.
It makes me think of, we had a friend when we had our first kid and we were right in the thick of, you know, all those sleepless nights and everything. We had a friend who had 5 kids and we felt like we couldn't complain to her. And I remember she told us, doesn't matter if you have 5 or you have 1, it's still hard.
I love that.
True with recovery too. Like, yes, there are situations that are far more complicated, but the person who told me this had a more complicated situation, and they were trying to get me from minimizing my hurt.
Which brings me to the next question I've got, because oftentimes when couples come to us, they've already been through 2, 3, 4, 5 different therapists. What's the worst piece of advice someone gave you in the beginning?
I'm happy to take this one. I have 2. The first one comes from a therapist, just a general therapist that we were seeing before D-Day, like the whole year before D-Day. And I remember it was just maybe about a month before our 20th wedding anniversary, and we had a session, and I was just ready to drop this bombshell. We were in the session, and I announced that I was like, I know that he is having an affair. And I even said who I think he's having an affair with. I fully expected her to be like, let's talk about this. I thought we were going to have this whole intervention. And instead she was just like, well, did you ask him? And I said, yes. And she's like, well, and she looked at him and he's like, I'm not. And it was that the conversation was just over. And so she basically participated in the gaslighting, for lack of a better word. She said that she thought I needed to work on my self-esteem and get a hobby. That was her response to me saying, not only that I think my husband's having an affair, but correctly even naming the person that I felt he was having an affair with. And then my other one would also be someone that I saw right after D-Day, another general therapist, not an expert. And she said, how would you feel about having an open marriage? And I thought that was a really odd and triggering thing to say to a betrayed spouse, because clearly I was in one without my consent. And I was like, no, why would you even say that? And she goes, well, she's like, based on everything you've told me, she's like, he's not going to change. He's just going to do this again. So if you're even at all considering staying in this marriage, I highly suggest that you just have an open marriage.
Oh, my word.
Wow.
What about you? What was the worst piece of advice?
Just based on, trying to figure out who to talk to about this, all of that was complicated, and I would go back and change how we did some of that too. But we had different versions of what we would say to various people. People would pick up on something's wrong, and they know us, and so they'd ask. But there was one that was more surprising, where we shared a version of what was happening. And I want to give this person the benefit of the doubt, because perhaps it was just because of the version they got. But their response was, that's not a big deal. I do that all the time. And
Oof.
definitely was like, well, this feels like a big deal. So we're just gonna pretend that was never said. So that was interesting.
Well, I hope you gave them a business card. Of course, you weren't working for Fair Recovery yet, so I guess you couldn't, right?
No, I couldn't at the time. No, I don't even think I knew. No, we were in the program at that point. So
Wow.
yeah.
Okay, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
All of us have the most difficult barrier to overcome. Maybe the hardest thing to release or to forgive. I'm curious, Candace, for you, what was that thing that was most difficult for you?
There was a lot, but I would say probably the hardest piece was the double life that was being lived, and just trying to wrap my mind around the fact that I was married to someone who thought that that was an acceptable way to live their life. I mean, it wasn't in addition to the physical and emotional infidelity. There were just even other aspects of it that I know we define infidelity as the keeping of secrets, but an example being that, like, I knew what company my husband worked for, but I actually thought that he worked in an office 45 minutes from our house. I would later come to find that he was remote. And so when he wasn't traveling, he was supposed to be in his home office, but he actually led me to believe that he had an office to go to every day. So that way he could, leave in the morning and come back at night. And that all appeared very normal. So I would say the double life for sure. It wasn't like you find out that your spouse is secretly fighting crime, something that would be an admirable double life. It was like, oh no, this was a lot to absorb and wrap your head around.
I remember Stephanie saying to me, Candace, that she used to think she really knew me and I was very intimate and open with her. And then she discovered that she only knew about 50 or 60% of who I was, and she had no earthly idea what to do with the other 50% of me.
It's scary.
It is scary. It had to be horrifying for her to see that I was living two lives. What about you, Jeremy? What was kind of the biggest barrier, the hardest thing to forgive?
I think it was looking back on some of the experiences that I thought were, we're on top of the world. We had a great first year of marriage. Going into our second year was going great too. And I thought there were experiences between my wife and I. But then in hindsight, looking back, I was able to piece together things in such a way to go, oh no, she wasn't actually present with me in those experiences, right. Those times. She was, in her mind, in her heart, she was with somebody else. And so that was a difficult thing for me to come to terms with, and embarrassing, shameful, that I look back on and had to kind of rewrite those memories a little bit.
Because of the efficacy study we did, I've got kind of another question I want to pursue. So both of you I know did EMS online, correct? How was the group experience compared to the therapy experience?
Completely different experiences, and I think they're both equally as important. EMS online, I had absolutely no idea what to expect. I'd also like to point out that I agreed to take it. It was my husband's idea. I agreed to take it. I had zero hope. I signed up and agreed to do it just as a way to buy time. When my life blew up, my twins were 17. They were in their senior year of high school, and they were getting ready to apply to college. And it was during the pandemic. We live in California. They kept canceling the SATs. We were getting ready to fly out of state, coincidentally to Austin. And so I wasn't willing to do anything drastic to let them know that anything was wrong. So I was doing a lot of pretending normal in front of them. So I agreed to take EMS online with my husband, but I went into that like, sure, I'll do this, but this isn't going to do anything for me. I know I'm going to file as soon as my kids know where they're going to college. Like, that was what I was really thinking in the back of my mind. Once I got into a group, I realized just the level of support. Like, not only, of course, the curriculum is excellent. There's several of the exercises that you do within EMS online that I thought were extremely helpful, but the level of support from the other people in the group. And just like what Jeremy was mentioning before, where everyone's story is going to be different. So everyone's boat is going to look a little different, but you're all trying to row in the same direction and you will get there faster together. It's not that I realized that initially, but just even though I quickly assessed that, I remember saying for week 2 was story week in EMS online. And I remember my husband and I saying, you know what, we're pretty sure we're going to have the worst story in the group, so we'll go first to make everyone else feel better. And we all had a little laugh and we went first. And we did, in fact, have the worst story in the group. And that's okay. Because what I found was that even though the details were different in everyone's story, it didn't matter. We all had so much in common. We all had a lot of the same triggers, a lot of the same questions. We obsessed over a lot of the same things. And it just really normalized that. And another huge thing that it did was I couldn't find there was literally zero empathy for my husband. I was so filled with anger, but it opened the door that I was able to see some of that in the other wayward males in the group, that I was able, it softened my heart a little bit to where I was able to see some things that they were doing. And I'd be like, wow, I really loved his answer to that, or look how hard he's trying, or he handled that so well, or things like that, that really, it was huge for us. And we also stayed our Married for Life, that the continuation of EMS Online. Like, our group met every Monday night for 2.5 years. We stayed with our group for a really long time.
What about you, Jeremy? The difference between maybe the course and then therapy?
In our situation, just from my previous job, it was very public, and I can share about this now because it's healed and it's over and it's in the past, and now it's just something that we hope helps other people. But at the time, didn't want anybody to know what was happening, and that made it complicated to do this thing, recovery, which we both wanted to happen, but to find a support system for that. We had some friends, that was great, but to jump on the calls, the EMS Online calls, and knowing that our faces weren't going to be seen, knowing that we could just show up and we could just talk to these people. We don't know where they are in the world or anything like that, and just hear their stories, hear their journeys. It was just that shared emotional weight of it, and it just helped us know we weren't alone in this. Even though we didn't deeply know them, we knew there were others out there who knew our story that were also going through the same thing. I don't know, it felt like it was fuel, like it gave us the ability to do the work and all the things it took to heal. And then the therapeutic side of it helped with the more complicated nuances of our situation, where there was a lot of what abouts and what ifs, and everybody's situation is so different. And so from the therapy, like, we were able just to walk in and go, this happened, this thing is going on, what would you say here? And I think both worked in tandem to really help us figure out how to heal and how to, just continue on in our life.
Jeremy, I couldn't agree more. I love the way that you just referenced that about what you were able to get out of therapy in comparison to being in an EMS Online group, that they're able to answer direct questions. And I love that it's an expert, neutral third party, to where if my husband and I were in disagreement about how something should be handled, what we should tell the kids, should he try to have closure with the affair partner, all sorts of topics that we were able to have an expert weigh in and provide that solution for us.
And have somebody who can do that doesn't, they don't go home and they're not affected by what you choose to do or not do, right?
True.
It could be a bummer to them if their clients aren't doing great, but just have that neutral third party. I like what you said, neutral third party in our process.
Everybody thinks they know what they would do, but nobody knows what they would do until they're in that situation. Another survey we're doing right now, a research study, is one of the predictors of whether couples make it is how many people they talk to. The more people you talk to, especially friends and family, the more likely you are to get divorced. If you decide to reconcile, it's like suddenly everybody out there is going, no, you can't do that. And so now you're caught between two forces, and
it's just complicated.
It complicates things big time. You're better off having safe people, a smaller group of safe people, rather than half the world. What's really fascinating, we were just looking at percentages of people that stay married in a meeting the other day. And what was it, at 5 years? Do you remember?
It was a smaller sample size, but it was at 5 years after taking the EMS Online course, which I guess Candace and I would be just about in this statistic too, that it was something like 88% were still married, or 82% were still married.
Which is so incredibly high. Because just as you were saying, Rick, if we asked people, if this ever happens to you, what would you do? The vast majority say, I would get divorced. And they, without even thinking about it, they just, that is their immediate response. So to then have in the 80% of people who choose to stay married and are still married 5 years later, that just makes my heart smile. That is such a win.
I would be also just curious to know, I don't know if we have this data, but to ask out of those 80%, how many would say they have a better marriage today than they did prior? We say this all the time, that this thing that's happening in your life, it doesn't have to define you. It can actually be something that refines you. And it can lead to something far better in your life, in your journey.
Betrayal trauma is, I think, one of the worst forms of trauma people experience. And I know that because I've been doing some more studies treating vets who have gone through single incident trauma like in Afghanistan. And the thing that's been interesting with the vets, the most severe trauma didn't come from being blown up in a Humvee. It's if they were betrayed while they were overseas. So how did you guys end up getting over your trauma?
For me, I would say it's a combination of everything we've talked about thus far. It was, having some people within our community that were really helpful that we could go to, talk to when things were good or bad, having our therapist that we could go in and talk to stuff, and then the EMS online course. All of those were just vehicles for us to be able to process what was going on, talk about it, and not get so sidetracked with all the flooding that might come at various times too. And then it's a little bit cliche to say, but it was also just doing the actual things that we needed to do in order to heal. Like, so much of the coursework and so much of stuff you can read about online, like there are steps you can do to help with the trauma. And we just leaned into all of that and we tried to do it to the best of our ability. And, sometimes it didn't go great. And then sometimes there were great healing moments that happened. But doing all of that was definitely the way it go.
What about for you, Candace? How did you heal from that trauma?
We quickly realized that due to the magnitude of the situation, we were going to need to assemble an entire task force. So our task force was comprised of, first and foremost, Affair Recovery. So EMS Online, Hope for Healing, Harboring Hope. We also ditched our general therapists and found experts who specialize in infidelity, trauma, and recovery. My husband and I each saw one of those therapists, and then we had a third that we saw together as a couple as well. I also did EMDR for some trauma therapy, just specifically for myself. And I know when I say that to people sometimes, if they do ask what we did, and they'll be like, that sounds so expensive. And my response is, have you looked into a divorce? It's like considerably less expensive, and your family's together. And I could just go on and on about the upsides. But yeah, we absolutely assembled an entire task force.
Who was the most difficult party for you guys to forgive, yourself or your mate?
For me, it was my wife. And it was a lot of the stuff we talked about already and coming to terms with, this was now our, a couple of years into our marriage, this was now our story and did not expect this to be a part of our life. And one of the good pieces of advice we got early on was to focus on the marriage, because for me it was a bit of a double betrayal, being that I knew and there was a friend of mine that was the other guy. And I had to kind of just push that off to the side, and that was a piece of advice I got, and just focus on that. And so the forgiveness first was between me and my wife, and then the whole other level of forgiveness was afterwards, when I also thought about what it looked like to forgive the other guy. And I found that to be surprisingly a little bit of a separate journey of its own too.
Totally agree. They were all hard and they were all very different. So I would say initially it was very, very difficult to even attempt to forgive my husband. Then it was an entire process to forgive myself, which I think I would say took somewhere around almost 2 years of just, I really, really beat myself up emotionally and spent a lot of time living in coulda, shoulda, mighta, woulda of why didn't I do all these things, that I did, within 2 weeks of D-Day, I could have done those years earlier. And then I would say the hardest person to forgive by far for me was the affair partner, because she has shown no remorse. I do know that she knows I know. And it wasn't that I was looking for an apology, because there's no level of apology that could possibly, make up for everything that occurred. I was just looking for more of an acknowledgement than I have never gotten one. I do not believe I will ever get one. And so I have reached a place of acceptance about that. But I would say that that probably took the longest out of spouse, self, and affair partner.
As you look at the milestones of going through this thing, you look in the rearview mirror, what do you see now looking back? How do you see the journey?
I see a woman who got dealt a hand she didn't deserve. I'm really proud of her because she quickly assessed that it was going to take something very drastic to rebuild her life. And this may sound a little bit crazy, and not that many people know this, but so my real name is Candace, but for decades I went by the nickname Candy. And during that early recovery time, the word rebrand didn't come to my mind, but that's essentially what I did. I was like, I need to summon some courage here. And at the time, my two favorite shows that I was watching were Yellowstone and Ozark. And so I tried to think like, okay, who are my two favorite characters from these shows? And it was Beth from Yellowstone and it was Ruth from Ozark, because they weren't taking anything from anybody. And when things would come up, I would actually ask myself, what would they do? And it kind of just helped me have a little bit of courage that I was struggling really hard to find. And so that was kind of that was part of my rebrand, was I decided that Candy was gone. Candace was going to need to step back in. And this breaks my heart a little bit, but I'm also really proud of this. I feel like it was as if Candy had done the best that she could. And she had been used, she had been emotionally abused, and she was having panic attacks in her walk-in closet on a daily basis. And it was as if Candace came in and said, I am so sorry that this happened to you. I'm going to get us out of here. And Candace didn't care how much it was going to take, how much money, how much time. Like, she just wanted to get it started. And she was really optimistic that she would be able to turn her life around. And it was like, I, for a long time, lived life in 20-minute increments. And so I have a huge amount of empathy for people who I know are living like that, because I know how hard that is. But she was just able to go, okay, what's next? And just keep moving forward, even when it felt slow. So I feel like when I look back in the rearview mirror, I'm proud that in the moment I didn't feel that way. But when I look back now and I see the progression, I'm proud of her.
Yeah, looking back in the rearview mirror, one of the stories that was really helpful for me was the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. And I'd known this. I didn't really grow up in church, so I found church later on, towards the end of my childhood. But this story stuck out to me in recovery because it's about this guy named Joseph who just gets like brutalized by his brothers, sold into slavery, has a horrible life. Horrible journey, and then one day he finds himself one of the most powerful people in Egypt, and he's looking at his brothers who are, starving for food, and he has an opportunity to get revenge on them for everything that they did. And his brothers are cowering before him, and he said this phrase, it's at the end of the book of Genesis, that just says, you intended to harm me, but God meant it for good. And I would say that mostly summarizes how I look at our journey, is there were pieces of my wife that probably didn't intend to harm me. There were things of her that I now know and understand that were just coming out of her. But it was harmful. But I can also say with confidence that God intended it for good. And there's so much refinement and growth and learning and depth of intimacy that has come as a result of this thing, which sounds crazy that that's what would come from this. But it has. And one of the things I say when I look back on it is that it's not something I would choose for myself, wouldn't choose it for anybody, but because of what it's given us in our marriage and then personally in our faith, I also wouldn't change it either, because it's just given us so much.
It's obvious both of you have rewritten your stories and you've learned to look at it a different way. And one of the things I find is that when you hit certain milestones, when you can see things differently, it frees you up to rise above it, to actually feel like, to feel good. I mean, you're telling a hero story now versus a victim story. One of the stories I think we sometimes rewrite is the story of our mate. Because people pass these judgments. They tell themselves things about their mate's motive that also make them a victim. And I'm just curious, what sort of kind of judgments did you decide your mate's motivations for what they did? Did you ever make it about you, or were you finally, and how did you get to the place where you saw it being about them?
Early on, I was just convinced that my husband was the most selfish person I had ever met. I thought that he just wanted it all and more. I felt like he used my daughters and I just as like a facade of a thriving career and a perfect looking family, and then was off also living this double life. I would later come to find that there was so much more behind all of that. My husband actually spent a great deal of time unpacking his why. And when he was able to then provide that for me, and it was not meant in any way to make excuses for what he did, but it was just meant to provide some insight as to what he had going on personally and internally that allowed him to live the life that he was living, or allowed him to think that that would be an acceptable thing to do. It was really helpful for me to have that insight, but I realized that what it brought up for me was I was actually looking for a completely different question to be answered. I wanted to have the question answered, how could you? And him unpacking his why didn't answer the how could you? Because then I came back with, okay, thank you for giving me this whole presentation on how you did this and why you did this with your life. But at the end of the day, you are not a sociopath and you know right from wrong. So why would you do this to us? How could you do this to us? And so they were two different conversations that we were having there that we were able to get some expert help to help us navigate. But initially, I would say that right out of the gate, I just thought he's the most selfish person I've ever met. I didn't think that there could possibly be anything more behind it, and there really was a lot behind it.
Yeah, a lot of people told us initially, I think maybe through our therapists and friends and the group, that this was not about me. And I just didn't believe them because it just felt very personal. It felt like it was, hurtful towards me. And then I think just through watching her go through her own journey of digging into her why and her sharing things, learning discoveries of herself along the way, helped me come to the conclusion to go, okay, yeah, this wasn't about me. And that's a hard thing, especially as a man. There's a deeper level of shame that maybe goes with being a betrayed man, that something about me as a man was not good enough for her. Watching her share what it was really about freed me to get away from having to constantly go back to that why question, and freed me some of that some of that shame as well.
I love that you mentioned that, Jeremy, because the realizing that it wasn't about us as betrayed spouses, that took me a long time to wrap my head around too, because you immediately take it as a personal offense to us as a person, to us as our marriage, and then we come to find out that they were dealing with a lot of things internally, and poor coping skills and plethora of a lot of other things that that led to those decisions that really, in my case, had very little to do with me. It feels extremely personal, but the more I came to find out, it actually wasn't at all.
Yeah, and I think a great distinction is, so I could see somebody watching this going like, I don't care why they did it. Like, it was personal to me. And when you're in that pain space, it's hard to see otherwise. And somebody shared this with me early on. Like, it doesn't excuse what happened.
Right.
It just explains it.
And the problem is, there'll never be a good enough why. But your projections as to the why, that's the problem. It's like we make our life a lot worse when we can't see the truth, when instead we just make it all about us. I so lost myself. I wasn't even me anymore in that journey. It's like I wasn't showing up authentically. I wasn't living according to my morals, my values. I was completely out of control. And that's no excuse at all. But I was in this crazy state. It's almost like if my dog gets out of the house and goes and bites somebody, I'm not the one who did that. But at the same time, I'm still accountable for what my dog did. And I think that a lot of times somebody who's acting out, no excuse, they're not in control of the dog. You know, they're being terribly irresponsible. In fact, they're letting another part, they're not showing up as a decent person, as a human being. Hopefully they come back and you recognize it's really the dog and not them. Mm-hmm. At one level, they're still a decent person if they can show up as a real person, authentically and with love and living according to their own values and their own morals.
And this is a part of forgiving them, is understanding what that dog was that was in them. You know, and one of the steps that I had to take, this is like the emotional forgiveness side, was write a letter to myself from her explaining why she had done, like she didn't write this, I wrote this as if I was her, explaining what had happened and asking for forgiveness. And that was huge.
And even saying what I just said, I'm afraid a bunch of people are going to go, that's just BS, that's no excuse. And I want to say, that's no excuse. I can tell you though, it wasn't me. I don't ever want to be that person again or to let that part out. I want to live responsibly and I want to live authentically and I want to show up as someone who loves, not as someone who is so self-centered and self-serving and, you know, that they use people. Were there other milestones for either of you that helped you to kind of rewrite your story and begin to see yourselves differently?
One of the big things that I just talked about, my journey of forgiveness, was a huge milestone. And it wasn't just for my wife, it was also for the other person too. And I originally had been through a forgiveness step process prior to this happening, and it was for other things that had happened in my life, and that worked. That felt like that was good. And this one didn't seem to stick. Like I would do the steps and do all the exercises, and then I would be like, I don't feel any different. And so I was still mad, I was still angry, unforgiveness, bitterness, all of that stuff. And then I came across a resource called Forgiving and Reconciling by Everett Worthington, and it created this distinction between emotional forgiveness and decisional forgiveness. I was deciding to forgive. I was not going on the emotional journey of what was required in order to experience forgiveness at an emotional level. And that was a milestone when I took time away to get out of town and really dive into those steps of emotional forgiveness. It was a whole different level of forgiveness that I didn't know I needed to dive into, and that was one of the biggest milestones of the entire journey for me.
I think a few stand out for me. My fourth and final D-Day, even though that was extremely traumatic, it was a milestone because it was that day on that I knew my entire story, and we couldn't start to rebuild until we got there. So I would say a huge one, fourth and final D-Day. And then from there, I would say being asked to speak at Hope Rising 2024, that when someone on our leadership team suggested that I do that, I thought, does she see me as a survivor? Do I see myself as a survivor? Would I call myself a survivor? And so that was a big one. And I made a promise to myself when I recorded that day that I was going to choose to let some things go. And I did. I kept that promise. And Jeremy, I love what you said about the different types of forgiveness. And I even remember, this may sound like an incredibly stupid question, but I remember asking my therapist, like, how do you know if you've forgiven? Like, literally, what does that look like? And so I chose to, when I say let some things go, it was really acknowledge that I can't change them. I have to accept the fact that they happened and they cannot be changed. And when I find myself getting upset about them again, I go back and I remind myself that the day I recorded that was the day that I chose to let some of those things go. So I have that as like a milestone date in my mind. And then another one is, and Rick, I'm really excited to tell you about this one because you don't know about this. October 13th of 2024, I told my husband that I want to stay married to him. And he waited over 4 years to hear that. And he was incredibly patient. And we actually just booked a trip to go to Puerto Vallarta this coming October to celebrate what will be our 1-year anniversary of that date. I know some people keep their same wedding anniversaries, and I didn't want to do that. So we don't celebrate that particular date that we got married anymore, but we have a new date now. And I'm super excited to celebrate it.
That's very neat.
Cool.
I love that. You guys do know that there will be tens of thousands of people that see this. And I wonder if that's a little bit intimidating. And how the heck are you getting over kind of the shame of talking about this story?
Yeah, this has been a long time, the process of coming to the conclusion that we're open to doing this, and a lot of check-ins along the way with my wife. Are we sure we want to do this? I mean, this is pretty dang vulnerable out there on the internet. But what we kept coming back to was what my wife actually says, that she heard from a friend, was that our story has become like our gospel. And the word gospel there, it just literally means good news. And so whether you're a religious person or not, I mean, you can kind of just approach that however you like. But it was good news that we'd been through this really difficult thing, but we've come out so much better on the other side of it. And so it became at one point about like, well, just maybe we can help people by sharing our story.
Right.
And we're talking about something that's a scar. It's not an open, gaping wound anymore. And so there's a freedom to just talk about the scar and be okay with that. And then for me personally, just I know there's not a lot of betrayed men who talk about this. And so wanting to be maybe somebody who can create a safer place for betrayed men to find help would be one of my big goals too.
I would say it feels a bit surreal. I've also never been recognized out in the wild. Rick, I have a feeling that possibly happens to you all the time. So I can't imagine what that would feel like. It hasn't happened to me. I feel like it's a huge privilege to be able to speak about it. I feel so passionate about where we work and what we do and the lives that we help rebuild. I'm excited to talk to people about it. I'll tell anyone about it who will listen. So I don't feel shame in my story. It made us who we are today. And I also just want to say, like, I'm so incredibly proud of my husband. I never would have fathomed the transformation that he would have in this. Like, he is 180 of the person he was 5 years ago. He leads groups now. And I love that he has such a cautionary tale to share with people. I just feel like it's a huge privilege to be able to speak about what we've gone through and what life looks like on the other side, because I remember all too well how hopeless it felt. I really felt like my life was over. I felt like there was absolutely nothing worth living for. And if it hadn't been for my kids, I really could have gone down a very dark road with that.
Yeah, it's probably worthwhile to say that, Candace, both your husband and my wife they don't get to sit here and do this. We get to sit here and talk about something that happened to us, but we're talking about what they did. And I just deeply admire my wife for her bravery and willingness to share what's happened in our journey to help other people.
Okay, one final question. What would you say to someone who just found out they've been betrayed?
I would just tell them this is not the end. I think that a lot of times it feels like the end of relationship, marriage, and I'm not saying the end necessarily circumstantially, because there's a lot of different ways it can play out, but this doesn't have to be the end of their journey. This can just be a chapter in their story one day. And I believe that if they're willing to accept what has happened and lean into it,
right,
and do something with it, that it can actually be the beginning of something far better, if they're willing to do that and do the necessary work to heal. And Candace and I are testaments to the fact that they're not alone. You know, there are people who deal with this and go through it. There's a lot more out there. Obviously, they just don't talk about it. But you're also not alone.
I would just want to, first and foremost, give them an enormous hug. And just as Jeremy said, remind them that they are so not alone. And I would encourage them not to isolate, because I know that was a tendency I had early on, and I think a lot of people can have. My biggest piece of advice would be to please not make any major decisions right away. that the only major decision you need to make right away is where you're going to get some help and the quality of help that you're going to get. But first, let's get some help and see, like, I like to tell people that it becomes less about what happened, and I don't mean to at all minimize what happened, but the bigger, more important thing is going to be what happens next. What are they willing to do now? What are you willing to do now? And so I would want to explain that to them and just encourage them to please get help as soon as possible. We're here.
I would hope they could all find out this isn't the thing that's going to define you. If you use it the right way, it's the thing that will refine you and help you to become more mature, wiser, better, stronger.
More at peace.
At peace, yeah. It's not okay, but it's also something that can be used as a catalyst for transformation. And I hope everybody can do that.
I have a question for you, Rick, because I was thinking about this with, like, so for us, we work at Affair Recovery. We get to do this, we get to help people on a regular basis. Like, we took finding meaning to the highest level possible. But for other people, let's say they're not going to work at Affair Recovery. I know that some people could lead groups, but let's say maybe they don't even necessarily aspire to do that. What can that look like for other people, that they aren't just simply surviving this, but that they have some story on the other side of this? Like, what can that look like?
One of the things I've noticed is that when couples really begin to heal and thrive on the other side of this, they discover that they're like a beacon. For instance, your wife volunteered you for something you really never probably wanted to be a part of. Your spouse volunteered you for something you never wanted to be a part of. But what I've seen is that suddenly people will come up and start talking to you that are dealing with this, and they don't even know what you've gone through. And you're going, why in the world are these people showing up? I don't know if you had that happen to you, Candace, but people just begin to show up.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Well, thank you again, guys. I appreciate you sharing your hearts, and especially I look forward to everything you're going to share on the channel.